In today's world, people feel lost in a sea of ideas. Which ones should we accept? Stay tuned because you're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. Here is your host, Kurt Jarris.
A good day to you, and thanks for joining us here on another episode of Veracity Hill. I'm glad that you are joining us here. We've got a great episode ahead of us. We're going to be talking about a sensitive issue in American society today, about race relations. And in a moment, we'll be joined with Dr. George Yancey of the University of North Texas. He's a sociologist, and he's written numerous books on race relations and racial reconciliation. So I'm looking forward to getting his thoughts on how we in our society should proceed on this very sensitive issue. And also to see maybe what some of his concerns and criticisms are of some of the ways that are making it in the headlines today on those strategies. But before we get into the main focus of the show today, just want to give you a brief, quick update on a few things. And so if you've missed the past few episodes, we've recently talked about the theology of sports when the Olympics was on last month. And we've also interviewed, we came up with a sub-theme for some shows, and we're calling them Stories of the Journey, where we talked with Andy Larson on his work in outreach to Muslim communities and the work that he's doing in the Middle East, including a documentary on peacemaking. And so I'd encourage all of you to listen to that episode. Last week, we had a cool chance to speak with Chris Date of Rethinking Hell. And we talked about the doctrine of hell, where we just went over a brief overview of the three main positions on that. And then in the second half of the show, he sort of we gave an opportunity to present his view. And so I asked some encouraging questions for him on that. One of the things I want, for the purpose of my show, is I don't want it to be so much of an interrogation. I'm not here to play gotcha. I'm here for honestly, it's part of my benefit, so I can continue learning, but also for your benefit too, so that you can keep learning on a variety of issues related to faith, politics, and society, as our tagline is all about. So if you've got any comments or questions about the show, specifically today on race relations, if you want to have your voice heard, give us a call. The number is 505-2-STRIVE. That's 505-278-7483. So so that does it regarding past shows. Defenders Media updates. We're still working on getting the conference material up on the web. We've got some pictures. We've also loaded those pictures to Facebook. We've still got some audio clips we're working on, and especially video. That takes a bit longer, but we're hoping to have those up this month. Chris is one of the fellows that helps us with that, and so he's actually in studio today. And something that we haven't done before is to get Chris and Joel involved in the conversation. And so we got a little microphone here, and so Chris, I want to welcome you for joining us here finally on the show officially.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Kurt.
So that's Chris, and Joel is actually just running a little bit behind. I think he had a flight this morning, so he's coming, I think, just about straight here. So he'll be joining us, but we've got a microphone for the two tech support guys. Get them involved if they've got questions or comments, or maybe I can throw some stuff back their way from time to time. Again, they've been a great help on the show for, I guess this is episode 9, so we've done it for a couple months now. Yeah, boy. Well, hopefully many more months to come. Okay, so that's Defenders Media, and then so just personally, my update. I'm still cranking away on my PhD. I've actually, part of the reason why there's been a delay on the Defender stuff is I've been catching up on my PhD work, which I'm on a deadline of sorts, so I'm cranking away and making sure I devote enough time and energy to that. So thank you for those that are supportive of those labors that I'm working on, studying the doctrine of original sin in the so-called semi-Pelagians. So it's a lot of fun doing my research. And also thank you for those that have been patient with us on getting that conference stuff up online. So hopefully this month we'll have it ready for you. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about race relations. And if you're an American, you see it all over the news all the time. This past summer especially, probably before that, we've had the Black Lives Matter movement has really taken the country by storm, disrupting political campaigns. I know with Bernie Sanders, they've gone on stage and literally taken it over. So there's a touchy subject here on how we are to have a just society and to make sure that everyone is treated equal, because it seems like there's a stigma out there with especially police officers about mistreating certain classes of people, and that does not lead to a just society. So joining me with us here to talk about race relations, not just the Black Lives Matter issue, but beyond other issues as well, is Dr. George Yancey of the University of North Texas. So George, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Thanks for joining us and for coming on the show today.
Sure, yeah.
So, okay, relative to my background knowledge, you are literally an expert in the field. You've written numerous books here. You've written Transcending or co-authored Transcending Racial Barriers. You've written Beyond Racial Gridlock. You've also talked about, you've got a book, Neither Jew Nor Gentile, exploring issues of racial diversity on Protestant college campuses. So you are an expert in the field of race relations. So give us an overview as to the issue, not necessarily the solutions yet, but what do you see some of the problems in American society today on racial reconciliation?
Well, I think a lot of people felt that no matter what else you thought about then Senator Obama, that when he was elected president, that racial issues would then at least slowly but inevitably go away. We elected our first black president, and, does not show that racism is dead and, that we would get along with each other. I think the mistake of thinking that way is that the things that created our racial animosity are much deeper than can be taken care of with electing a black president. We don't truck in overt racism anymore in the United States. Well, very few people do. I mean, I can't say 100%, but
sure.
99.5%. But we still have the effects of our histories of racism, the way it's changed our social structures, the life chances it's affected for people of color. And so until we confront that and have a healthy dialogue with that, we can elect as many black presidents as we want. We still are going to have the sort of racial alienation we see in our society.
Yeah, and so give us, there are some people that may think that there isn't any, that there aren't any issues right now and that things are good. So could you give us some specific examples? I can think of a few names that have made the headlines, but give us some that maybe we even haven't heard of.
Well, I know that there's incidents of police shootings and such, and I don't really focus in on those as much because any given shooting, I just don't know all the details, and who knows whether it was justified shooting or not until more and more of the information comes out. But when you look at, for example, wealth, even when African Americans have the same level of income as whites, they have less wealth. By wealth, I talked about things such as home ownership, retirement assets, things of this nature. And that's just a factor of our history. It's one thing if you've had money in your family for many generations. Another thing, you just now got money in your family.
Gotcha.
Well, that creates, there's an inequality that's there. And I'm not blaming people specifically. I'm saying that this is part of the social structure that's in our society. And these are some of the issues that we have to figure out how we're going to deal with in our society if we're going to really be able to move to where we need to go.
Okay, yeah, so wealth is an issue there. So something that I've kind of thought about, I guess maybe when I was back in college, was affirmative action policy. And I don't know if this is something that you studied, all that much, but do you have any thoughts on that? Does that seem to provide a good way towards bringing about generational wealth, right? So your concern was that, well, people can make the same income, but but generally speaking, white people have, this generational wealth that gives them a big step forward ahead of other people. So does affirmative action, is that a beneficial policy, do you think?
Well, affirmative action, the purpose of affirmative action was to deal with some of these institutional problems that are there. Now, whether it's doing a good job or not, people can argue, but that was the purpose behind it. Mm-hmm. My sense is right now in our country, there's not the support for affirmative action to really keep the current program going the way that it is. Mm-hmm. And so we need to think of new ways in which we can deal with these institutional problems. But that's kind of along the lines. Affirmative action is not built on the notion that people have racism and they hate people of their races and they're going to hold them down. You have civil rights legislation for stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Affirmative action is built on the notion that we have these social structures that are holding back people of color, and how can we intentionally overcome these social structures?
Mm-hmm. So would you say, do you generally see well-intentioned policy here, but it doesn't necessarily always lead to good results? Is that maybe you see that for this particular case? Do you see that in other cases as well?
Well, and part of what we're trying to do is we're trying to make a compensation for what's happened historically, mm-hmm. but also, with the realization that we live in a society that has changed. And so you can make the argument that, if we overcompensate, then that's going to create its own problems as well.
Yeah.
This balancing act. And unfortunately, what happens is that the solution is probably nuanced, but nuance gets lost in our not just presidential, in our political system.
Yeah.
The loudest voices tend to win. And the loudest voices is rarely nuanced. And so I think that's part of the problem why we continue to have racial alienation in our society.
Yeah. The soundbite society, you definitely can't nuance when you've only got 7 words that makes it all over the news, and people take your statements out of context and such. And sadly, so I want to be careful here because we can't talk about political candidates, but we can talk about policies and issues. But sadly, it seems that a lot of political pundits, they really are just out to get the opposite side, whatever the heck the opposite side believes in. I see it on both sides. And I tend to be disappointed in the side I typically associate with because, so for instance, with President Obama, sometimes I will see people caricature or take out of context even things he says, which I don't find, a problem at all when you look at what he's really saying. But people will take that soundbite and they will run with it for attention. And so that does seem to be one of the issues in our society for sure.
Yeah, I guess that gets to the larger aspect of our society that we are so polarized, and race is one of the ways in which we're polarized, but obviously in other ways we're so incredibly polarized that we can't work together. We must think the worst of people that we disagree with, and then we must defend things on people of our side that normally we would not defend. And one would hope that Christians could overcome that, but unfortunately that's not always the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow. Okay, so there we talked a little bit about sort of political philosophy and politicians, but it goes to another level too. It goes to just this a broader social level, more not just political. So one of the things we've seen now is the Black Lives Matter movement, which has really gotten a lot of attention in our society. When would you say that movement began?
Well, I think it began with Trayvon Martin.
Okay.
I think that was the shooting that sparked it. Now, I think that it would have begun even without Trayvon Martin's shooting. Some other incident would have occurred, and that would have developed. But I think that's probably what people point to as starting the whole notion towards Black Lives Matter.
Yeah. Yeah, and it seems to be the case here. I mean, you have instances where a black person dies from as a result of gun violence. And let me say specific, if I can, without offending people, specifically what often is the outrage is that it's by a non-black person. because I live in the suburbs of Chicago. I see it all the time on the news, and the local news is interviewing people in the black community, and yes, there is outrage, and there are even protests and whatnot, and the church leaders come together and say, hey, we need to solve the gang violence, the issues, but that stuff doesn't make national news. It's the other type. It's the police officer kills a black person. That'll make the national news. Well, especially with the advent of social media. I mean, this stuff is shared all over. So that seems to be particularly some of the concerns, and maybe I don't know if this has again been an area you've looked at. I know because some of the stuff you've done has been more of racial reconciliation within the church, right? And with I think in some of your earlier studies it was on interracial marriage. But what about police officers? I mean, it seems that a lot of people are disappointed because a lot of police officers seem to get off the hook after an internal investigation. Are you sympathetic to those concerns, or do you think that the police structures that we have are, generally speaking, striving for justice, approximately speaking? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, here's my sort of approach, and we can use this as the issue. There's other racial issues out there, obviously, but we can use this as the issue. I think the solution is not something that I'm going to be able to conceive of in my office, away from the streets, away from being a police officer, away from being an African American who lives in areas. Because I live in a suburb now. I'm an African American living in a suburb, so I'm not going to encounter it nearly as much. What I think the solution is going to come out of is, can we have a healthy dialogue between interested parties? And by healthy dialogue, I mean, can we enter into a state where we actually listen to where the other group's coming from and then try to construct solutions that will meet the needs of everybody? What I see in our society today is almost no effort towards that. People say we're talking about race, but we're really not. We're talking past each other. We're talking at each other. We're not talking with each other. And even when we put, pundits on Fox or MSNBC or CNN, they don't talk to each other. They talk They talk to the people that advocate for them.
Yeah.
Can we have a healthy dialogue? Because we're not having a healthy dialogue. And if we don't have that, then all we have left is fighting with other people. And that's what we're going to do. So, I can't, I'm not going to say, here's what the police need to do, or here's what has to happen in the black community or anything like that. I think that those decisions need to be made, on a case-by-case basis and city by city by the activists and those who are in the police force getting together and having an honest dialogue. The sad part is I'm not optimistic of that happening anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah. So what would be some practical tips you would give people, say just, the average Joe here? Maybe we're not a police officer or, we're not an activist of sorts, but what are some tips that you would give to people? I mean, you said go and talk to people. That seems to be one thing. I mean, how do we talk to people with whom we disagree with? And it may not be someone that is a different skin color than we are, right? We may just have different political philosophies. Well,
I wrote about this in the stream a few weeks ago, and here's what I suggest. And, I don't suggest doing this and thinking, okay, I'm going to solve racial problems. Maybe if enough people did it, we would change our atmosphere and we would get somewhere. But here's something that I think people really could do. If you know someone that you disagree with them on racial issues, if you're very conservative and you know someone who is very Black Lives Matter, or if you're very support Black Lives Matter and you know some people who are very conservative, invite that person out to a lunch or invite that person out for a drink or some occasion where you can talk with them. And then engage what I would call active listening. And what I mean by that is, I want to know how you feel about such and such an issue. Can you tell me about it? And then as you listen to them, ask them questions. You are not to really think about why they are wrong. You're not to have to agree with them, but what you're trying to do is understand why they come from where they come from. And then to really know that, at the end of it, you would say something like, okay, here's what I hear you saying. And then you read in your own words what you hear them saying. And then they'll either say, no, that's not it, or yes, you understand. Now, they may then want to know how you feel. They may not want to know how you feel. If they don't want to know, then, you go on, you start talking about, something else. Start talking about the Cubs.
Go Cubs.
Whatever. Yeah, they're doing pretty good. But the key is, you at least the next time someone of that political ilk brings up an issue, you know what's driving them. And you may disagree with them, but at least we're not in a position where we have to demonize them. And if enough people do this, when we do have dialogues back and forth where we're trying to find solutions, we're going to treat each other as humans and not as the sort of,
us versus them
that we like to put up.
Yeah.
So that that's something that we can all do if we've not done it yet. If we're just characterizing people in the worst possible way, that's where you need to go into active listening. One last thing: if you're active listening, it means that you don't have the right to tell them what they can and cannot say. So you can't say, well, you can't offer this as your perspective. That's their perspective. They own that. That's their right. So you're really trying to listen for how they approach the problem and trying to understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, no, that's good. Because, some of the things that I try to think about as someone who's I studied philosophy as an undergrad. One of the main fallacies that oftentimes occurs is a straw man fallacy, where people will set up a fake idea, right, or a straw man, and attack the straw man instead of really understanding what people are saying. So it seems like we have a lot of straw men out there. We've got caricatures, and we need to listen to people so that way we can understand exactly what they believe. And then you make a good point about reiterating and articulating what exactly it is that they believe, and so that way there's understanding, and that's a good start, right? When you have a common understanding, it's a good start to progress, to finding a good long-term solution, and to reconciliation. And then you make a good point there about we're not to tell them where they went wrong, at least right then in the moment, right? So as someone who does apologetics, right, apologetics is both a science and an art. And the science is the arguments, but the art is the listening and the understanding where people are coming from and knowing what to say and when to say it. So really, this, talking about these social issues, we can depend upon our training as small a apologists, and that'll come in handy for those discussions. Okay, wow.
And I think, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I just think if that by doing this and creating an atmosphere where we understand one another, when the issues come up, we're going to be able to deal with them. Because right now we can't deal with them. I have no confidence in any group dealing with racial issues right now, and because I know I've watched the approaches of the different groups, be they conservative or liberal, and how they approach an issue is, can we beat down the other person and get our way? And until we move away from that, we are going to continue to have this racial animosity in our society.
Yeah. Wow. Well, this has been great. If you're listening right now and you want to have your voice heard, you've got a question for Dr. Yancey here, give us a call. The number is 505-2STRIVE. That's 505-278-7483. And if you're a little bit shy and you don't want to have your voice heard, there also is a chat box. If you click on the show there in Spreaker.com, and you can, I think you have to create a login. That's the downside. But then you can comment there in the shows, and we'll see your chat messages as well. Well, Dr. Yancey, this has been great. I want to continue our discussion after a short break from some of our sponsors.
You're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
Evangelical Christians are talking about hell. What if we believe what we believe because we've always believed it? What if the gospel is really a matter of life and death? We want you to open your mind, open your Bible, and rethink hell. At rethinkinghell.com, evangelicals look at what the Bible says about hell, putting conventional and controversial views to the test.
Join former presidential candidate and retired U.S. Representative Michelle Bachmann at the Illinois Family Institute Faith, Family, and Freedom Banquet, September 30th at the Stonegate at Hoffman Estates.
It is in God that we as a nation put our trust.
Michelle Bachmann and the Faith, Family, and Freedom Banquet. Order tickets at IllinoisFamily.org.
No government gave me rights that only God can give.
Order tickets today at IllinoisFamily.org or call 708-781-9328. Underwritten by Illinois Family Institute.
Well, thanks for sticking with us through that break. I'm here with Dr. George Yancey, and today we are discussing race relations, ways that we can improve the conversations that we have with each other, and for looking at the things that we see in our society today on the news and how we should think about them, whether they are good things or bad things, and how to move forward. Dr. Yancey, before we continue on, we've got a segment of the show called Rapid Questions. And this is a segment where we ask short, lighthearted questions, and we're looking for fast responses. So are you prepared for this? It's
you just psychologically probe me then? And
yeah, it's nothing self-incriminating, but they're, lighthearted questions. So, I've got to get the game clock up here. So it's a minute long, and we'll see how many you can get through in that time. Okay, so here we go.
All right.
What is your clothing store of choice?
Target.
Taco Bell or KFC?
The Bell.
Excellent. What song is playing on your radio these days?
Switchfoot. Everlasting.
Okay. What's your favorite sport?
Football.
All right. What's the first thing you buy at the grocery store?
Usually bananas.
What is your spouse's favorite holiday?
Probably Christmas.
Do you drink Dr. Pepper?
No.
Have you ever driven on the other side of the road?
Not on purpose.
Would you drink a Dr. Pepper if it were handed to you?
No.
What's your inner shake flavor?
My what flavor?
Inner shake, a milkshake. Milkshake flavor.
Oh, I guess strawberry.
Strawberry. Nice. Awesome. Well, thank you for participating in Rapid Questions. Good. So,
okay.
It's a great little way for people to learn just a little bit more about you in a fun, maybe a bit kooky way. Maybe if we ever meet, I'll have some bananas for you so that way you don't have to get them at the grocery store.
Well, we're always out of bananas, so that's why I probably buy them first, because I know I probably have to buy them because, of course, you can't keep them very long.
Yeah, well, I've got a 2.5-year-old at home, and she likes to eat bananas, and then she doesn't. And then when she doesn't, then my wife makes delicious banana bread. So we go through bananas.
That'll work.
Yeah. So we go through those as well, so I understand. Okay, so we're here talking about race relations. We talked in the first half of the show. We spoke a little bit about affirmative action policy and political commentary, but then you also gave us some very nice practical ways that we can sit down with people with whom we disagree with and attempt to understand each other, and that's a good starting point for moving forward on the issue, because sometimes a political change isn't going to bring the change. Sometimes it does over generations. I can think of segregation, for example. Political change brought about good long-term change, but that took generations. It didn't happen right away. And so sometimes the change has to be us. And so we've got to take the first steps here at the local level, just talking with people one-on-one, taking them out to coffee or getting a bite to eat and talking about these issues, and listening to their perspective to help us understand and move forward on that. So in the second half here, what I would like to talk to you about and maybe get your thoughts on is the safe space, the Black Lives Matters movement, and the safe space, the college campus atmosphere. Let me just start off with a bang here. I read an article that talked about how some people were calling for segregated dorms because, they wanted a safe space. I forget which campus that was at, but did you happen to come across that article? And if so, that strikes me as, oh my gosh, it's like we're taking a step back in racial reconciliation.
Yeah, I've seen the headlines. I've not actually read the article, so I don't know the details of that. If it happened in University of Texas, I would probably speak out against that. And here's what I think Christianity brings something to this discussion that people don't always realize. And you, being apologetic, you probably can appreciate this. If you really boil it down, on a certain dimension, there's two ways of looking at the world. Either humans are perfectible, or we're not, or we're fallen. And Christians, of course, say we're fallen, whereas when you look at humanism, it says that, we are perfectible. If we're perfectible, then ideally some group will perfect itself, and they'll be able to determine rules that will be good for all of us. But I don't believe that as a Christian. I believe that groups, even groups that have been victimized, such as African Americans, that if they were given power, they would victimize others. And to me, this is an example. And that's not necessarily victimizing others, but it's kind of rather foolish to talk about segregated dorms and safe spaces and such. I think that's really more about power than it is about really furthering the cause of race relations. And because of that, I think that that's why we need to have a certain amount of humbleness to listen to other people. The solution is not going to be found in any particular group. The solution has to be found in people having some sort of safeguards because they have to listen to other individuals, finding solutions together. Because we're not perfectible in the sense that we get enough education, we're going to figure it out on our own. We are fallen creatures, and we do have a sin nature that makes us to create solutions that give us more power, even at the expense of others. So in that sense, I know that may be a little bit roundabout way, but that sense I think Christianity offers something that's missing in the debate, because the debate is really played on the grounds of humanism, which tends to believe that we just educate people right, people will do what's right, and we can trust people who've been victimized to do what's right and not victimize other individuals. And that I simply do not believe to be the case.
Can you? So we've sort of got a broad category there that the philosophy here is under the guise of humanism or perhaps secularism. Are there different philosophies even within that camp for how to deal with racial reconciliation on college campuses? Are there sort of subcategories or specific philosophies that you can provide for us so we can more easily identify them?
Well, my sense is that individuals who tend to approach this from a more of a secular or humanist perspective, there are some that with some voices that go against the grain, but they tend to be very small. The general principle is, that marginalized groups need to be empowered, and the empowering of marginalized groups is going to be the solution because they have been victimized. We got to give them the power, no matter what. And so, what they want, we must find ways to give it to them. And I almost want to say within reason, but some of the ways that I've seen college administrators act towards groups that have been marginalized seem unreasonable in my opinion. And there are some people who have a humanist perspective that may put some limits on that, but I really, at least at this point in time, I really have not seen a lot of that. When you see the protests across campuses and the administration basically, with some exceptions, of course, not holding the protesters very responsible. We see them shutting down other speakers and very little pushback on that. Then my sense is that that's just a general perspective of these individuals at this time, and I think it comes from the fact that there's a belief in humanity, in that these people have been victimized. If we give them power, that they're going to now be on equal footing, and they're not going to misuse that power. And but if you believe that humans have a depraved nature, if you give any group too much power, even a group that's been victimized and knows what it's like to be victimized, then chances are they're going to victimize others, because that's who we are.
Mm. Yeah, instead of justice, there will be revenge. Is that what you're saying?
I think history is replete of that occurring. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, and it is a tricky issue. We've seen college campuses respond in different ways. I recall, of course, there's some that are creating these safe spaces. I mean, there was the protests at University of Missouri, and I think there was something going on at Emerson College. But then you sort of get the opposite. So you've got, there was a video online of Ohio State. There was a sit-in, and one of the administrators came in and said, if you're not out of here by 5 a.m., you're expelled. I'm summarizing, but that's pretty much what he said. And then the University of Chicago, just recently, since the start of the school year occurred, I guess a couple weeks ago, they sent out the letter saying that there's freedom of ideas at the school, and so they essentially weren't going to tolerate sort of the protests of sorts. Those were exceptions, but yeah, I do know of both of those exceptions, and those were good exceptions, to see that there were some administrators who were saying, look, this is going to be a free speech area. Mm-hmm.
But if you look at surveys, young people are more and more likely to reject free speech.
Mm.
They want speech that conforms to what they believe, but they're not very, very willing to support speech that counters what they believe.
Right.
And that's an unfortunate feature that we just have to acknowledge at this point.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
but I did see that video, and I said, well, good. I mean, look, Martin Luther King was thrown in jail for what he did. All right. Now I believe in what he did, and I think he was confronting the situation much more
constructively, maybe
justifying justifying his actions much more than some of what I see, because I'm not a believer in the concept of a safe space, especially ideologically.
Yeah.
But he thrown in jail. He paid the price, that was there. So if people want to protest, then the price you pay is you get thrown in jail. And if your cause is right enough, then over time you can win out. But
right.
But you don't see that very much today.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to play a clip for you here from Morgan Freeman. Maybe you've heard this, but for those listening, maybe you haven't. And so here he gives his. This is just a 1-minute clip we'll listen to on his solution to solving the race problem. So I will go ahead and load that up here, and hopefully there won't be a YouTube ad.
Black History Month you find
ridiculous.
Why?
You're going to relegate my history to a month?
Oh, come on.
What do you do with yours? Which month is White History Month? No, come on, tell me.
Well, I'm Jewish.
Okay, which month is Jewish History Month?
There isn't one.
Oh, why not?
Yeah.
Do you want one?
No.
I don't either. I don't want a Black History Month. Black history is American history.
How are we going to get rid of racism?
Stop talking about it. I'm going to stop calling you a white man.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you to stop calling me a black man. I know you as Mike Wallace. You know me as Morgan Freeman.
So there we have, and I know he's spoken on other topics within the category of race, but here his solution is to just stop talking about it. I guess maybe you'd call this perhaps colorblindness, right? Just
Yeah, this would be a more colorblind approach towards it, and there are some blacks who advocate a colorblind approach. Most blacks don't, but there are some that do. It's a much more popular approach among European Americans than African Americans.
Yeah.
And I think that people with a colorblind approach they deserve to have their say on what we should do as well. I think we all need to be a part of that conversation to understand where people come from. I think the solution ultimately is not going to be colorblind, but it's not going to be as radical as others. We're going to find something that we can all agree upon. But until we have that dialogue, we can't find that.
Yeah. So what do you see as some of the shortcomings of this strategy?
Well, and Morgan Freeman can speak for himself. Part of who I am is black. That I can't be colorblind in that way. I'm raising a kid. I think part of who he's going to be is black. And there's a history to that. Being black has affected my life. It's shaped my life. And so to tell me to just ignore that is not realistic. And also, when we look, I gave you the example of wealth. We've had a history where European Americans, and not all European Americans, and I know there's some poor whites out there, and I'm not saying that you're white and you get this wealth card and stuff like that. I would not say that, because there's some whites who have had some down on their luck, and I'm very, very sympathetic to that. But there's advantages to that, and for us to be colorblind all of a sudden right now is to ignore those advantages that many whites have had without taking any sort of step to see whether or not we can at least reduce that advantage. So, for me personally, a colorblind approach is not adequate for dealing with racial issues. And any solution I would come up with would not be one based purely on colorblindness.
What are some other strategies? So the colorblindness here seems to be one strategy. What are the other options for approaching this issue? And feel free to speak a bit more academically here. In terms of maybe you've come up with camps, you've observed different approaches. What might those be?
I kind of boil it down to about 4 different approaches that people talk about. I mean, of course, these are exaggerations. They're not exact. I mean, and there's variations of them. But colorblindness is definitely one of them.
Okay.
I also talk about angle conformity types of approach, where people argue that the way we deal with racial relations is that people of color learn how to succeed just like how whites succeeded. And so we train them, to succeed in similar ways. I also talk about a multicultural approach, where basically we focus in on honoring all cultures, and especially cultures of color, minority cultures, giving them respect they've been denied. And then I talk about a white responsibility model, and this is probably what you see a little bit more in Black Lives Matter, with whites are the problem, whites need to get their act together. This is the model which would argue that people of color cannot be racist, and things of this nature, a much more of a radical type of model. So those are the 4 basic approaches, that I've talked about in some of my writing.
Yeah. So, and maybe we've seen some of the shortcomings to the. You called it white responsibility, that 4th model. Now, something I've just read in the news about is multiculturalism, specifically with respect to Germany. And I know Germany is a different culture than our own, but they've had an influx of Middle Eastern immigrants, and Angela Merkel has even gone on the record saying that multiculturalism has failed. And part of that's because some of the Middle Eastern immigrants aren't even teaching their children how to speak German. They're teaching them how to speak their native tongue. And so there's a failure of assimilation. And so that's something I like to talk about in the immigration debate, is assimilation. That often goes neglected. And so that's been an issue in Germany. In terms of how that might apply to us today, I mean, what do you think are some of the do you see shortcomings of the multiculturalist approach?
Well, I would argue all the approaches have their shortcomings.
Okay.
None of these approaches. I've just critiqued the colorblind approach. I mean, I critique all 4 of these approaches, and multiculturalism has its shortcomings as well. Despite its intentions, oftentimes what happens is we do start favoring cultures. I mean, the intention is that all cultures are equal, but the reality is all cultures are not equal. Yeah. Are we going to say the Nazi Germany culture is equal to our culture? I don't know anyone who would say that. And so we realize that, So that becomes very problematic. There does need to be some degree of assimilation for a society to. I mean, you just point out too, and learn the language. Whatever language that is, we have to be able to communicate with one another. So any one model, and my argument is that no one of these models is going to be adequate. And I would even argue as far as to say all these models tend to neglect the whole aspect that humans have a sin nature, and people are going to misuse whatever model they're in for their own advantage and distort it. And that's why, for me, the key is communication, trying to figure out solutions that everyone buys into, and not just impose our particular solution on other people who don't want it.
So would you say that so there are the four models. Are you proposing that we sort of need a mixture of a little bit of both, or just that we need to, the first step is understanding each other, and maybe, that's the way forward. But, like you'd mentioned, in terms of all four of those models, they all fail in some respect. So how do we move forward then if these models don't work? Is it some combination therein? Is it just, it's the love of Christ that leads us on? Is that really the only solution here?
Well, as a Christian, the ultimate solution is Christ and us living it out the way we should. But we know that not everyone's Christian, and not all Christians do that. And so practically, we can't rely on that. And that's why, I guess what I would say is, I propose in my writings this fifth model, what I call a mutual accountability model. Okay. Where what we have to do is communicate with one another and find solutions. And the solution might be more of one of these models than the other, But it'll be a solution that we arrive at through dialogue together, through a healthy dialogue, not a dialogue in which, well, you can't bring that in here, so because you have to accept my solution. And because we've arrived at that solution, we have buy-in. Just use the colorblindness model. If we impose colorblindness without getting buy-in from people of color, you're going to spend the rest of your time fighting people of color who do not want this model. On the other hand, if we impose a white responsibility model without getting buy-in from whites, you're going to spend all your time getting fighting back from whites, and it's not going to work. But we can find maybe bits and pieces of some of these models, and maybe a lot of one of these models, but people will say, okay, we can accept that, and other races can accept that. Then everyone's working to try to solve it, rather than some people working to try to solve racism and other people working to sabotage it.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a good strategy where, like you mentioned, we all have a buy-in, and we're all invested into it, but the only way we can get there is through a common understanding, through a dialogue, talking with one another, and coming up with solutions that we're all willing to take, even if that means we've got to be stretched a little bit, right? Maybe we're outside our comfort zone on some issues here and there. And interesting enough, even in politics, that's kind of the way it gets done. Everyone sort of gets a little bit of the piece of the pie. But that, something we haven't seen all that much in politics is compromise. It's just been more of a polarization over the past several years now. So hopefully on this issue we won't see polarization, and hopefully we can come to a peaceful solution, have there be a harmony, and that way we're going to have a more just society. So, Dr. Yancey, I want to thank you for coming on the show and talking about the issue. I know this hasn't been your most recent issue of research. You've been looking at sort of a Christian acceptance or response in academia. Tell us just briefly a little bit about what you've been doing in that area.
Yeah, over the past few years I've been looking at what I call Christianophobia. And I started off looking at academia and documented that conservative Protestants are more likely to be rejected than any other religious or political group. But then some of my latest books have been looking at Christianophobia in general, in our society in general, and who tends to have it, how it manifests itself. And my argument has been that to understand some of what's happening in our society, we need to understand that Christianophobia is behind some of it. Not all of it, but some of it. Just like to understand some of what's happening in our society, there are racial issues, maybe not overt racism, but at least, a history of racism and racialized structures. We have to understand that. Same thing with Christianophobia. It's not exactly like racism. I don't want people to leave here thinking, oh, he thinks what Christian face is what blacks face. No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is it's a very real phenomenon.
Yeah.
And so we as Christians need to be aware of that and maybe adjust how we're approaching things in our society because of it.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's really great because, there are a lot of Christians that are not in academia. They're making this cultural observation, and perhaps their voices are just rejected or neglected because people think, oh, those silly Christians, they've always been part of the power structures. So for them to claim that there's a mild form of persecution in this respect, shall we say, often just goes without any weight. And so for someone like yourself, a sociologist, an academic, who's doing the research, and you're essentially confirming our cultural observations to a degree. I'm sure that's encouraging for some people. So carry on. I say carry on.
Well, if anyone wants to learn a little bit more about that, pick up my book, Hostile Environment. And in it, I refer to other books if you want to read some of the more academic stuff. But that is a readable book. It's by University Press. Nice. And I go more into my work on that.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so there's Hostile Environment. And if you want to read more, check out the books that Dr. Yancey here has. You can go to his website. It's www.georgeyancey.com. And you're also on Facebook and Twitter, so people can follow you on those social media sites as well. Well, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, the show today, we talked about different approaches to race relations. We initially talked about sort of a political issue, affirmative action at the beginning in the first half of the show. And then we talked about Dr. Yancey provided some practical ways for us to engage with people. So I'd encourage you to go back and listen to his tips on what we can do right now to move forward or to start to move forward on the issue. And then we also talked about the Black Lives Matters movement and his thoughts on that, on the college atmosphere that's happening today. And then at the end there, that was great. We sort of got a breakdown of the 4 philosophies on how to deal with racial reconciliation. And he gave us some criticisms, constructive criticisms that he had about those approaches, and he had an alternative model, which, maybe that's the way we got to go is through that all buy-in approach. So, again, thank you, Dr. Yancey, for joining us and for giving us helpful tips and advice on that. And also, I want to encourage you to keep going on the research there on the Christian reception in academia. Now, since we've opened up the peanut gallery, shall I say, we've got Chris and Joel here. We've got a microphone set up. Chris said hi earlier. I'm curious, what are your guys' thoughts? I mean, do you have any thoughts on this issue on race relation?
I mean, we live in an area of Chicago where it's about 50-50 between
Hispanic and Anglo. Else. Yeah, right.
And then I think more recently it's actually shifted over to 60-40. Just the way we're moving in our town.
In which favor? Who's got the 60?
In Hispanic favor.
Okay, all right.
So being here, I am not Hispanic. Yeah. But obviously this is a people group I want to be able to talk to and reach. And even though there's not as strong, I guess, locally, we haven't seen as pronounced racism or that makes national headlines. There's a desire even within the Brotherhood of the Christian Faith to be connecting with across those cross-cultural boundaries,
right?
Because even if there's no tension or racial tension in that area, it can be hard for different cultural backgrounds to want to mix, even if they've got that commonality of Christ. So it is an issue even within the church, and I'd love to be able to. I think Dr. Yancey is a great resource to kind of explore, like, how can we reach across to our brothers and sisters of different cultures, no matter what culture we're coming from.
Yeah. It's it's especially the case if you live in a town like West Chicago, where it's so easy to start reaching across the street, to use a figurative term. I mean, here we're in downtown West Chicago, and most of the storefronts are owned by Hispanic businesses.
Right.
So, by the way, if you can hear him, that's Joel. He's joined us. He came in a little late. You were off. You flew in this morning?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I had a red eye from San Francisco.
Oh, red eye. Have you gotten any sleep? No sleep. But he's made it here today, so it's good to have the crew back. They were off last week, and I was missing them. Okay, so Chris, I know something you've been thinking about recently, and we've chatted about is violence in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And not we're running short on time here now, but just to give you and our listeners a preview, we're gonna in the next week or so we're gonna be interviewing Dr. Paul Copan on that, and he's written a book, a couple books actually. Is God a Moral Monster is the more popular level, and then Did God Command Divine Genocide? Mm-hmm. So hopefully you'll look forward to that. Yeah. And now to you listening. That will be a pre-recorded interview. He's unable to do an interview on Saturdays. But with that, I want to encourage you to send me your questions. If you have any questions or comments about the supposed genocide commands in the Old Testament, where God tells the Israelites to go kill everyone, to wipe out the women and the children, how can Yahweh, if he's supposedly all loving, if he's good, how can he do that? How can he tell the Israelites to kill everyone, including the women and the children? So we're going to be talking with Dr. Paul Copan on approaches that Christians have had to understanding that. And then hopefully, Chris, that'll be a good show for you. So a nice benefit. Good. All right. Well, hey, so that does it for our show today. I'm grateful for the continued support of our patrons. So those are people that are just chipping in $5-10 a month, making this happen. It takes a lot of work producing these week after week, and I'm thankful for the patron support. And if you're interested in becoming a patron, chipping in just a little bit, there are some benefits there to doing that. You can go to our website, veracityhill.com/patron. And I'm also thankful for the partnerships with our sponsors, Defenders Media, Consult Kevin, This Guy Floor, Rethinking Hell, the Illinois Family Institute, and Evolution 2.0. Thank you to the tech team. They're back, Chris and Joel. And to our guests today, Dr. George Yancey. And thank you for listening in and for striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
You've been listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. This is a listener-supported program. For more resources, including past shows, visit veracityhill.com.